Inshallah. I want to add one more. I forgot to give it to you. There are quite a few of the names of the Prophet that I mentioned in the Quran, but one of them that sometimes people get confused about is An-Nabiyul Ummi. All right, is An-Nabiyul Ummi. Now, in the work, you'll see that the name Ummi, it's on page. There's no page numbers. It's there somewhere, and it's translated as one taught by God. All right. And what's important here is not how it's translated, but how it's not translated. It's not translated as unlettered, and it certainly isn't translated as illiterate. Okay? And you do encounter this sometimes, that just as Shaykh Daniel mentioned, that names have an effect on the bearer of the name. Names sometimes have an effect on the one listening to the name. So we are here and we are learning this year about the names of the Prophet ﷺ in order to increase us in love and reverence and respect for the Prophet ﷺ. But sometimes the way in which a name is translated can have a significant impact on, or translated, or I should perhaps say interpreted and understood, can have a significant impact on the way in which on the way in which that thing is understood. Okay, so we sometimes encounter this. Well, this is encountered a lot in the Quran. This is where we talk about you losing things in translation. There are some words in the Quran that can be translated in two ways, which are opposite to each other. The two ways are opposite to each other. So as for example, means both to go forward and to go back. Qur means both purity and a menstrual period. It has both meanings, right? And they're opposite meanings of each other. Okay, and this is where when you're reading a translation of the Quran, the translator will choose one of those meanings. Okay, whichever one he chooses, you lose half the meanings. You lose half the meaning of the verse. Okay? Sometimes the problem is more though. Sometimes the problem is that a word is carelessly translated and it has an impact, an effect, a negative impact on the way in which you perceive that thing. And a good example of this is Ummi. Okay? Ummi, I have seen it translated as illiterate. Okay? And I have seen it translated as unlettered, which is kind of a nicer way of saying illiterate. Okay? Now, translating it as illiterate in English, translating it as illiterate, honestly, you would fear disbelief for a person who translated Ummi as illiterate. Okay? Because illiteracy is a defect. Illiteracy is, or I should say, perceived as a defect. That is to say, the inability to read and write is perceived as a defect. It's perceived as being, when you talk about people are illiterate, you mean they're uneducated and so forth. Okay? And we do not ascribe defects and deficiencies to the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? So what is the meaning of Ummi? And how do we understand the word Ummi? Okay? The word Ummi is explained by the commentators as Man la yaqra wa la yaktub. All right? One who does not read and does not write. Now there are, I won't go into the detail, there are 6 possible derivations of the word Ummi. For example, some of the commentators say the word Ummi is from Qura. And Qura is Mecca. So An-Nabiyul Ummi means the prophet of Mecca, the prophet from Mecca. The prophet from the mother of cities, right? Which is Mecca. Some say Ummi comes from Ummah, which is a community. Okay, وَكَانَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ Ummah. Ibrahim was an Ummah. He was a nation unto himself. And some of the commentators say the meaning of Ummi is similar. That the Prophet ﷺ was a nation unto himself. He was like an entire race. He was like an entire people. It's like an entire race of people locked into one person. Okay? Both of those are possible derivations, but they are not the accepted understanding of the word Ummi. The word Ummi means one who does not read and does not write. Now, what's important to bear in mind here is it doesn't mean one who cannot read and cannot write. It's one who does not read and does not write. Okay? So how do we understand this? There's a couple of principles. The Prophet ﷺ, as Shaykh Daniel mentioned, whenever he is addressed in the Quran, and this is what reminds me of this actually, what he said, whenever he is addressed in the Quran, he is addressed with an ascription of respect. Every term he is called is an honorific, i.e., every time the Prophet ﷺ is addressed, he is addressed with a title that indicates respect and esteem and honor. A good example of this is Nabi. So Nabi means one who brings news from the unseen. It's from Naba. But it can also be from Nabwa. And Nabwa is an elevated place. So a Nabi is one who is elevated, one who is highly ranked. Same with Rasul. The word Rasul also means elevation. It means one who brings a message, but it also means one who is elevated, one who is prominent, okay, or raised up. Similarly, as you said, with Mudaththir, with Muzammil, and with all of the other titles. So Allah also calls the Prophet ﷺ An-Nabi Al-Ummi. What this means, according to our principle, the first principles, is that Nabi Al-Ummi cannot be a term of denigration. Ummi cannot be a term that indicates a defect, because Allah addresses the Prophet ﷺ as Ummi in the Quran. Therefore, it must be a term of honor. So, let's assume that Ummi for the time being means one who does not read and write. How is that a term of honor? How is it an honor to say that the Prophet ﷺ does not read and does not write? And the answer is to look at reading and writing. Why do we read and why do we write? Here's the question. Why do we read? Why do you read? Why do you read something? Let me ask you, do you read Quran or do you recite from memory? How many here, if I just open the Quran to a random page, could recite it from memory? If I gave them the start, just recite from there. I.e., who is a Hafiz? No one's putting their hands up. I know there are some profiles here, but I'm not going to embarrass them. I certainly won't test them. Right? Who has the greater competency? One who does not need to read the book, or one who needs the letters in order to be able to read the book? Yes? Who has the greater competency? Who is more honored in this regard? Hamza is putting his hand up. I think Hamza knows the answer. Is the one who can read it from memory. Yes? There you go. He's saying Hamza. If Shaykh Hamza says I'm right, then I'm right. All right? The one who does not need to read. Why don't they need to read? Because the knowledge is in here and the knowledge is in here. When Ghazali, when he was about a teenager, he was coming back from a place called Jurjan. He was coming back, he was waylaid, his caravan was waylaid by highway robbers. They took all the wealth of people, and he had a kunnash with him. A kunnash is like a satchel. And they took the satchel, and he ran after the robbers. He said, please give me my satchel back. Atini kunnash. Give me my kunnash. It's not of no use to you. They said, what's inside it? He said, and inside was the notes that he had taken. He had studied for 3 years in that place. He had taken notes down, what are called his ta'aliqat. He had taken his notes. He said, my notes are in there. He says, there's no use to you. This is my knowledge. It's not worth anything to you. It won't benefit you. It will benefit me. So the highway robber turns to him and says, this kunnash has your knowledge in it. It's got your knowledge in it. So now I have your knowledge and you have none. Now you don't have the knowledge. I have the knowledge because it's in this satchel. And Ghazali said it was like Allah was talking to me. I went back, I spent 2 years memorizing it. Because I want my knowledge to be with me, not on paper. The need to read is either because you can't remember or because it is a way of learning. When would you need to learn from something written down? If you didn't have the teacher with you to explain it. Right? If you didn't have the teacher to explain it to you. Alright? Here's Shaykh Daniel sitting here. Right? If I want to ask him a question, I'll ask him. I won't go look in the book because it'll take me time to find it in the book. I'll have to read it, I'll have to process it. He'll give me the answer in a sentence. It'll make sense to me. I hope it will anyway. It'll make sense to me. You understand? So if the teacher is present, you don't need the book. Alright? Unless the teacher doesn't know. But the more the teacher knows, the less you need the book. And if the teacher is Al-Alim, if the teacher is all-knowing, and the teacher is Al-Khabir, the all-encompassing, and you are present with the teacher, why would you ever need a book? Why would you ever need the knowledge written down? Is the ability to read, the necessity, I should say, to read, is the necessity to read in order to gain knowledge a advantage or a defect? It's a defect. We read because we have either no other way of getting the knowledge or we are unable to retain the knowledge. But if you are in the presence of the all-knowing, if the knowledge that you require is transferred directly from beyond the seven heavens straight into your heart, why do you need a book? You don't need a book for anything. أَدَّبَنِي رَبِّي فَأَحْسَنَ تَأْدِيبِي. My Lord made my tarbiyah. My Lord was the one who raised me. And what a beautiful job he did. How beautiful was his instilling of adab in me. And why do you need to write? Either because you'll forget it. Abu Huraira, who narrated the most hadith among the Sahaba? Abu Huraira said, no, Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, he wrote down more, he had more hadith than me, because he wrote his down. He wrote his down. I remember mine. Abu Huraira went to the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Rasulullah, I'm with you, I try to remember everything you say, but I keep on forgetting. The Prophet ﷺ takes his, according to one narration, takes his cloak, spreads it out. He does this. Then he takes the cloak and he wraps it around Abu Huraira. He says, go. Abu Huraira says, from that day onwards, I never forgot a single thing the Prophet ﷺ said. Who's the great hadith narrator of the Sahaba? Abu Huraira. Why? It's all in here. It's all in here. He didn't need to write it down. One reason. Reason number two is to transmit knowledge. Why would you need to write down the knowledge you're going to transmit? Why would you need to write down the knowledge you're going to transmit? The Emperor Ashoka of India, all right, when he converted to Buddhism and he forswore violence and he gave a code. He wrote down a code. He had the code written on pillars, like obelisks, and he had them put up in all the major centers around India. This is the code, and it's called the Ashokan Code, one of the oldest codes of law in history. Right? Hammurabi, who according to some of the ulama was Dhul Qarnayn. Right? Cyrus the Great, I should say, who according to some of the ulama was Dhul Qarnayn. Right? He had the laws written down on tablets and distributed among the land. Why? Why? Why bother? Why not just tell people? Well, how faithful are the people that you're telling going to be? I give someone a message and I say, go and give this message to those people. How do I know that that person, by the time he gets to those people, he won't change it? The first forgery of a hadith that occurred was in the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. A man went to an outlying tribe. He said, the Prophet ﷺ has sent me to you and said, oh, by the way, I should marry that beautiful girl in your village. The people had a little bit of nous. Now, people didn't lie about the Prophet ﷺ. People knew they didn't lie about the Prophet ﷺ. Right? They went to the Prophet ﷺ. Did you send this man to us? Yes. Did you tell him to give us his message? Yes. Did you tell him he can marry this girl from our village? No. No. First forgery of hadith. What happened? Why would you need to write things down? If the message would not be preserved unless you did. But the Prophet ﷺ did the tarbiyah of his Sahaba, and he did it in such a way that the message did not need to be written down because it was preserved in the hearts and the souls of those he left behind. His khulafa. اتبع سنتي وسنة خلفاء الراشدين المهديين من بعدي عضوا عليه بالنواجذ. Follow my sunnah and the sunnah of the rightly guiding successors I leave behind me. Who are they? Not just the four. The Sahaba. Those who took from the Sahaba. Those who took from the Sahaba. The righteous of each generation are the khulafa of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they transmitted his religion faithfully. They transmitted it in word, in deed, and in state in such a way that it did not need to be written down. It was only written down later on for ease. Why would you not need to write? Because you don't need help to remember. And because you don't need to ensure that your message is preserved. Because you can ensure it by what you've done to the messengers. Because you brought up the messengers in such a beautiful way, in such a perfect way, that you don't need to write it down just so they don't go wrong. The Prophet ﷺ didn't need to write it and seal it with a stamp to make sure that it wasn't interfered with by people. He just sent those people. He sent the Sahaba. And this is why some of the ulama say An-Nabi al-Ummi is min akhassi asma'i Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's one of the most specific names of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's one of the names that indicates the perfection of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The one who did not read and did not write because he did not need to read and he did not need to write. Such was his perfection, and such was the perfection of his tarbiyah that he gave to his companions. So may Allah protect us, and that is why it's translated here as Ummi, the one who was taught by God. Right? May Allah preserve our understanding, give us good understanding, allow us to realize and understand the perfections of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah fill our hearts with his love, fill our hearts with his qualities and his attributes as much as we are able to. Ghurfatan min yadi, we ask for. Ghurfatan min yadi, a draft from his hand. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam.